I'm Abhi, and we are here to talk about data culture as a product. We're going to talk about the juiciest bits of this, which is really three things. Number one, data culture matters. Hopefully we all agree, and that's why we're here. Number two, data culture is hard. It's hard to actually build data culture, to improve data culture in these companies. And number three, and really the thrust of this talk, is that those challenges around data culture are easier if we take off our data hat for a moment, put it aside, and pick up the product manager's hat, the sequined cowboy hat that we walk by with awe and disgust, and wear that hat and think about data culture as a product. Think about the problems of data culture as product problems, and use the frameworks of product management to reason about how we would make those things better. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And we are going to run through, as a product manager might, thinking about what are the outcomes that we actually want to drive. If data culture is a product, what are the outcomes we want this product to drive for our customers, where those customers are these internal operators in these companies. Two, if data culture is a product, what are these features and capabilities that we express in that product? And then three, how do we get people to use the shit we build? Data people know that if you build it, they will not necessarily come. Product people know that even better. So what can we learn from product orgs, from growth orgs, from UX orgs around how do we actually get the tools that we build to have uptake? So for that, we're going to start with why are we building in the first place? What are these outcomes? What is the value that we want data culture to provide? And for that, it's helpful to first understand that when we talk about data culture, what we're really talking about is decision culture. Companies are decision factories. Everything that happens in a company is a decision. The purpose of data culture is to drive decision culture. And these decisions that a company makes every day, continuously, 24/7, define everything that happens in that company. Companies are actually a little more than the decisions that they make. And if you're a company that makes these decisions effectively, quickly, cheaply, accurately, over and over and over again, you are going to have a good time. That company tends to be successful almost tautologically. If you're a company that does not make those decisions effectively or quickly or easily over and over again, you are likely to have suboptimal outcomes. You're likely to be a much less successful company. So decisions are important. Companies are their sets of decisions. Decisions define success or failure. They're valuable. So how do we drive better decisions in companies? Like a lot of things in data, we can't go directly to the output, right? In data, we sometimes don't attack an output metric. We attack these input metrics. In product land, we can't always attack an outcome directly. We have to look at the levers for that outcome. And it helps then, as product people, to ask what must be true for this outcome. We want great decisions. What must be true for an organization to make great decisions? There is a long list of those considerations. To me, and for the purposes of this talk, what we're most interested in are these four criteria that we see on the screen. So number one, in companies that make great decisions, those companies tend to have great shared context. Operators, Jack Welch used to say that the team that sees reality clearest wins. In companies that make great decisions, operators throughout the company have shared context. They see reality clearly. They see it for what it is. They have a shared sense of that reality. They see it uniformly across the enterprise. Number two, operators can make decisions that are predictable, that are informed. They make a decision and they have an informed idea of what that decision is going to do. And they can look back at their previous decisions and say, we missed the call, here's why we missed the call, and here's how we iterate in making our calls. Number three, decision inputs are diffuse. So a line level operator has a different perspective, has different context than an exec, and vice versa. Companies that make great decisions recognize that. And they bring that diffuse context, those diffuse decision inputs to bear on the process. And number four, basically, decisions aren't political, right? Right is right. It's minimally more difficult to make the right decisions than the wrong decisions. Decisions aren't the highest paid person's opinion. Decisions are founded on this kind of ground truth. So these are our outcome levers, right? Organizations that make good decisions, they tend to feature these criteria. These things tend to be right in those organizations. And the reason we're here, the reason why many of us in analytics have jobs, is because data can help. Data can help drive shared context. Data can, of course, help us make predictable decisions, can help us audit prior decisions, can help us take diffuse context and centralize it, can help us make decisions transparent enough that they are depoliticized. And the key takeaways for us then as data culture product builders is two things. One is that the purpose of everything that we do in data culture and in data is, the value is, insofar as it makes that healthy decision culture possible. Data is valuable, and there's so much hand-wringing, there's so much self-flagellation around what is the value of data teams, what's the ROI, how do we measure that? The first order question to ask is, what does that value even look like? And that value is making this healthy decision culture possible and meeting these criteria where we can meet them, where we can augment them. The second takeaway is that that is going to be different in every organization. In some organizations, there's a shared context problem. In some organizations, there's a politics problem. In some organizations, there's a predictability problem. That will vary based on the organization that you're in. And our first order concern in building these products, building data culture as a product, is what is that outcome lever? If these are our 4 outcome levers, what is that outcome lever that we care about in our unique organization? That's going to vary. In different organizations, there's going to be different types of problems. In different organizations, data can be variably effective at solving those problems. It tends to be that in most organizations, the most important problems are shared context and predictability and accountability. But the first order concern for us is to just ask, if we're building these products and we need to start with outcomes, which of these outcome levers are most important to us? So let's assume we do that. Let's assume we identify that it's actually shared context and predictability and auditability. This organization has no sense of reality and can't predict and audit its decisions. What do we build? What would a product manager do next? So the way we would approach this in product land is, great, we have these outcomes, and now we need, between outcomes and actual products we build, we need to understand needs. We need to document, what are people doing? What are people doing today in service of these outcomes that isn't going well for them? What are people trying to do that they can't even start doing? What are all of these needs that are expressed in operators today? And how can we take those needs, understand those needs, and then build against those needs? Again, the way we would approach this in product land is we would probably use something like jobs to be done. Now, I love JTBDs. This is a rich literature, in and of itself that I think data people have a lot to learn from. For the purposes of this talk, we are going to distill the notion of job to be done down into basically just this job story. When blank, I want to blank so that I can blank. When a situation happens in service of some outcome, I want to do a certain thing. Across the enterprise, for these outcomes that we care about, across the enterprise, operators have these jobs to be done. Operators are trying to do things in service of these outcomes. If we can understand what those needs are, if we can express them as jobs, we can now start to think about how we would build product against these jobs. And that is exactly what I tend to do when I run these exercises. So at a recent company, late stage, fintech, we did exactly this. We went through the enterprise. We talked to folks around the enterprise. We tried to reason about what are they trying to do in service of their outcomes, in service of trying to meet those decision levers, those outcome levers, to build a healthy decision culture. And we came up with stories like this. So in this case, we were working with a finance org, and we distilled down that as a CFO, when adjusting monthly plans, I'm looking at the past month, I'm closing the books, I'm looking at the next month, I'm thinking about what to do. I want to identify the best opportunities to move my key financial indicators? What can I do right now to move my key financial indicators? And how do I reallocate capital across teams? How do I take money out of that performance marketing budget that never does anything anyway? And how do I move it to product-led growth and to drive growth investments or product investments this month? In this organization, we actually went and we cataloged these jobs. We tried to identify what these jobs are, and we cataloged them across the whole enterprise. We came up with hundreds of these jobs: finance org, marketing org, sales org, support org, every org in the company, and we cataloged these jobs. And for each of these jobs, we tried to understand what is the job, who is trying to perform it, what is some metadata around this job that's meaningful to us? How satisfied are people in currently doing this thing that they're trying to do? How important is this thing that they're trying to do today? How do they actually go about doing it? What is the first thing that they do? How do they actually define the problem? That CFO, how do they actually start this job process? And how do they finish it? And what are all the steps they take in between? How concretely do they go about doing this? And we take the needs, and we take the context, and we take all of that context collectively, and we start to build product against that context. In that organization, hopefully y'all can see this okay, in that organization, we took that job that CFO was doing, which took them 17 hours a month to do, with the CFO and the head of FP&A, something that was highly important and had low satisfaction. We took all of their job steps, all the context we knew about that job, and we started to build products, including this one, this opportunity simulator, where that CFO could now look at an output metric, these key financial indicators that were outputs. They could bring in those inputs that were relevant to these outputs. They could toggle these inputs, and they could see what would happen on the other side, and take a process that used to take 17 hours a month for that CFO and bring that down to 5 minutes a month. Something that was only possible because we understood deeply what that job was, understood what those job steps were, understood the context in which that job happens, and then understood that need, and then defined a product that met that need. Great, so that sounds cool. It was really impactful for us. We do this a lot, but that sounds like a lot of work, and it is. If you actually go and you catalog these jobs, you will end up with hundreds of these jobs. And that's exactly what we ended up with when we did this exercise recently. So where do we start? How do we prioritize? And I like to think of this in two different ways. The first is to basically prioritize on the margin. So we'll take off our sequined cowboy product management hat for a second, pick back up our data person baseball cap, and approach this as a data person and look at the metadata. One thing that we can do, one thing that we often do, is to do what product managers do here, to look at the satisfaction and importance, to look at the data that we collected around each of those jobs, to standardize, to normalize that data, and then to plot it, and then to reason about the plot that results. What we actually did, what we often do, what product managers often do as well, is to plot these jobs against satisfaction, against importance, to see where all of those jobs land in this kind of landscape, and to look and recognize that, hey, if jobs are happening today that are high satisfaction and low importance, they're probably overserved. They're probably not where we start. Where we want to focus is in that other end of the spectrum, where jobs are really important. People are identifying them as really crucial to their workflows, but they're not satisfied. They have pains. They have unmet needs. And that's where we focus, and that's where we start, and that's where we unlock marginal leverage. The other way that I approach this is a more foundational approach, and that is if you actually make all of these, if you actually catalog all these jobs, if you build out this, hundreds of jobs, you'll start to recognize that these jobs, especially as they pertain to data, distill down into basically 8 buckets of things that operators are trying to do. Operators are trying to model the business. They're trying to create a causal model or a growth model and express the physics of how this business actually works. They're trying to then monitor the elements of that model, the metrics in that model, see how they're trending, see how they're doing, goal versus actual, see how the business is evolving. They're trying to segment and dimensionalize data. They're trying to explain root cause changes. They're trying to forecast into the future. They're trying to simulate potential scenarios. They're trying to drive accountability loops through mechanisms like business reviews using data. And they're trying to build plans that align. Ultimately, all of these jobs in service of a data culture, especially as they, in service of a decision culture, especially as they pertain to data, bucket into these 8 types of macro job buckets. And importantly, these buckets have an ordering to them. To be able to do what is on the right, to be able to do what I call the data operationalization jobs, the planning and the reviewing, the driving plans that align and driving these accountability loops, requires you to first get really good at the data analysis jobs, the segmenting, explaining the past, explaining root cause changes, forecasting into the future, and simulating potential scenarios. To get really good at the data analysis jobs requires you to first land modeling and monitoring. Requires you to first have a sense of what is the growth model that defines this business, what are the metrics that make up that model, and to track how that model evolves over time. Whoops, what did I just do? Okay. And so that presents a surprise. And so that presents a natural point of leverage that the first place to start, and when I go into organizations, the first place I start is to focus all my resources, all data resources, onto modeling and monitoring. And for those of you that caught my talk last year at Data Council on designing and building metric trees, this should sound familiar. And we talked a lot about this stuff, where if you think about your growth model, in that talk we thought about the growth model as a tree, but if you think about building the growth model as the first thing that you do, reifying that growth model, you can now hang these analysis type jobs on that growth model, that the monitoring, the segmenting, the simulating, the forecasting, the explaining, those are things that are made possible and arguably only made possible if you have that growth model expressed. And if you have that growth model expressed, then now you can operationalize that growth model with the reviewing jobs, with the planning jobs, these operationalization jobs that people are looking to do. So growth modeling is really foundational. And the key takeaway here is if you think about prioritizing on more of a foundational approach, the number one thing to do, the first thing to do in your organization's likely the first thing to focus on is metrics and a growth model of those metrics relationships. Getting enough of the right metrics, underline, getting those metrics to be reliable, getting those metrics to be expressive and express the physics of the business, and tie those metrics together into a growth model that can now support those analysis jobs and then ultimately support the operationalization jobs that we are looking to meet. And indeed, that's exactly what we did here too. We built this opportunity simulator for that CFO org. We saved all this time, right? The 17 hours to 5 minutes. But the first thing that we did was spend 2 months getting the metrics right. The metrics, getting enough of the right, reliable metrics, express the physics of the business, build that growth model so that something like this can build on that growth model and understand those relationships and how these metrics perform. Cool. So we build products. Now comes the hard part, the fun part. How do we actually get people to use the stuff that we build? How might we approach this again as a product person or as a growth person? For me, the way I approach this is by first recognizing that always and everywhere, adoption, activation, engagement, retention, getting people to use the stuff that we build, getting people to activate on those things, getting people to retain and keep coming back is behavioral change. What we're trying to do is to change behavior. This is true for products, formal software products. This is true for data products, and it's true for data culture as well. And the way I approach behavioral change, actually trying to change people's behavior, is by, again, using the frameworks of product management and growth product management and relying on a behavioral model. Now, I've used this behavior model for years, lots of different companies, lots of different contexts. I often run growth teams as well, so this is actually what I use to convert people off of free trials. This is what I also use to drive MAUs for data products inside of companies. I don't know that we have time to cover all of this, but The way this growth model works is, so the way this behavioral model works is essentially 3 types of behavioral levers that we have. To get people to adopt and to activate on the things that we build requires us to really understand motivation and friction, and to tweak those levers around motivation and friction. To get people to engage and retain in the long term requires us to really understand habit formation loops. And where we're going to focus right now, and we'll see how much time we have left, is actually just on that adoption and activation piece. So, I mentioned I've been using this model for many years. Actually started using this model when I, years ago, was working to set up the growth teams at several of the most popular BI tools in the world, tools that you all would recognize, where our challenges there were less so top of funnel growth. It was less so how do we get more customers to buy our products, and more so how do we get customers to success with our products? How do we get more people? I brought Looker into my organization. How do I get more people to actually use Looker and then become Explore users and deepen their engagement, et cetera? And we use this model to reason about how we actually do that. We start with motivation. So to get people to actually adopt, to get people to activate, to get people to move towards, in our case, actually using things like Looker, the first step, the first order consideration is how do you increase motivation? The push that people need to go away from their current status quo of being locked up into Salesforce reports or Google Sheets or Post-it notes or what have you, tribal knowledge. And so we reasoned about motivation. And what you see here is that there are, and how product managers think about this, how growth people think about this, is that there are 4 forces to motivation. In the BI example, there are push forces. There are things that suck about the status quo. There's things that suck about Salesforce reports and about Google Sheets that are pushing me away from my status quo. There are things that are pulling me, that are drawing me from the status quo and into a new reality, things that BI tools can do that my existing tools cannot do. There's habit that locks me in because I've always done this. I've always used Salesforce reports. I've always used Google Sheets. There's habit that locks me into my current way of doing things. And there's anxiety that prevents me from moving away from a status quo because this is something that I'm comfortable with. What we have done in the BI examples, what I do when I run free trials, what I often do in these data culture examples is to try and exploit these motivation levers. You have push and pull, which are excitatory, that are propelling you away from a status quo, and you have habit and anxiety that are inhibitory. And what we try and do is to use the tools of internal product marketing, right? How do we communicate? How do we message? How do we educate? How do we enable? How do we understand for a given person, for a given persona, what is their motivational profile? What is their push-pull habit anxiety? And how do I tweak those levers to actually drive them towards, away from a status quo and towards a new solution? And we do that over and over again to get them the momentum they need to start moving towards a new solution. Once they do that, we've given them this kind of action potential. They're moving towards a new world. Once we do that, we need to ensure that that momentum takes, that momentum holds, and it isn't arrested by friction. And so the next thing we think about, the next thing we thought about in these growth orgs is how do we lower friction? And there are 3 important types of friction. There's cognitive friction. I don't understand what a Looker Explorer is. I don't get it. I don't understand what a Looker View is. There's interaction friction. Why is it so hard to make a damn pie chart? And there's emotional friction, like maybe I get it, maybe I understand how to use this tool, maybe I understand what Looker Views is, but I think I'm just going to fuck something up and I'm worried about it. So there are these friction considerations that, again, we were very deliberate about. We tried to understand every user type, every persona type, and how does cognitive friction manifest for them, interaction friction manifest for them, emotional friction manifest for them, and how do we use the tools of, again, internal product marketing, messaging, enablement, UX, design, to meet them where they are, to dampen down these friction, to tamp down the friction considerations, to actually get them to drive to adoption. And this is, again, what we actually do in practice. So for our opportunity simulator, the opportunity simulator that we rolled out, we needed to overwhelm habit. These CFO organizations were used to working in Google Sheets and Excel. They had this entrenched habit. They had cognitive friction around how this would work because this does not look like a spreadsheet. So our efforts at driving adoption here, which we got up to 100%, our efforts at driving adoption were all geared towards how do we use the tools at our disposal, understand where these people are in terms of their motivational profile, in terms of the friction profile, understand where to target. Do we pull motivation levers? Do we pull friction levers? And which of those do we pull? We might have a couple minutes left, so cool. So I'll talk a little bit about engagement and retention as well. So once we get people to engage, once we get people over the hump, right? They're motivated, we've tamped down friction. Now how do we get them to engage? How do we get them to retain? And here, the levers that we think about are compounding benefits, mounting losses, and value expansion. The more you use, right? You've started to use, you've had this germ of interaction. Now the more that you use, we want your benefits to accrue. We want the more you use, the more value you get out of the product. We want the more you use, the more switching costs you have. And the more you use, the more diversity of value you get. I come for a certain type of value when I'm starting to use a BI tool, and my value starts to diversify and expand. That footprint starts to expand. There's a lot to talk about here that is outside the scope, but what I will say is that the most powerful ways to drive engagement and retention on aspects of data culture are to drive these things, these compounding benefits, mounting losses, and value expansion by anchoring on to what I call the big two, the two most important workflows in any company. And those big two are business reviews and planning cycles. If you have business reviews and planning cycles, the most important thing that you can do for any tool that you put out there inside the company, for any aspect of data culture, is to bake what you build into the big two. If you don't have the big two, if you don't have a robust business review already, if you don't have a robust planning cycle already, the most important thing that you can do is to drive those. And here too, in our opportunity simulator example, a key way we drove ongoing expansion, right? We pushed the motivation levers, we pulled the friction levers, we tamped down that friction. How do we get people to continue to engage and to expand their engagement? We baked it into the big two. In our case, we took this opportunity simulator, we stood up a monthly business review process, and we made this one of the first steps of that monthly business review process. We baked it into every business review such that now we have these compounding benefits, right? You started to use it, monthly business review 1, 2, 3, and now these benefits compound. You have these switching costs that start to mount as well, these mounting losses, because we are entrenched on using this as a part of our core workflow as one of the big two. And you have some value expansion here as you discover opportunities for using this tool in new ways that come out of that business review process. Cool. So what did we learn today? Number one, we learned that I can talk pretty fast. So thanks for putting up. We learned about, look, data culture can be reasoned about as a product, right? That's the key thing. If there's one key takeaway, it's we all know that other functions have a lot to learn from us as data people, but we have a lot to learn from other functions as well. And I think one of the things that's missing in the data world is we haven't learned enough from product. We talk a lot about we want to be a product team, we don't want to be a service team. We haven't taken that seriously enough. If you really want to be a product team, you need to learn from product management. You need to learn from product marketing. You need to learn from UX. You need to learn from design, these disciplines that are specializing in building products. And we can take those frameworks, we can apply them throughout all the work that we do, and especially in data culture. We can reason about data culture as a product problem. We can pace through the steps of how we define the outcomes, how we design the features and capabilities, and how we growth hack then, and use that to actually effectuate change in these organizations. Cool. You're free.